I'd like to start by asking you all a few questions. Just by way of show of hands, how many of you here have, in the past year, been on any kind of march or demonstration? Quite a few of you. How many of you have signed an online petition or liked, shared, followed any kind of campaign through social media? Pretty much a full house, I think. So, last question. How many of you have wondered whether that's enough? Or whether there's perhaps something more that you could be doing to stand up for the things that you believe in? Me too. That is certainly how I have been feeling these past few months. I feel like we're going through an important time in history and that I don't want to be watching the news as a bystander. But I confess, this isn't a feeling that I've felt here in the UK before. It is, however, one that I recognise really well from my time as a British diplomat, which is what I did for the first 15 years of my career. I was posted in Jordan, Iraq, the United States, Ethiopia, and Guatemala. I worked with organizations like NATO and the African Union. And when I had all these different roles and positions, in many of these places, world events felt very real. I remember in my first posting in Jordan, being sat down by a young Palestinian boy. And he taught me through all the dates of the Middle East peace process and the conflicts that preceded. He told me who was who and the ups and downs of it as his family saw it. And it struck me then that history wasn't something he learned. History was something that he was living, something he was talking about around the dinner table at night. It had ongoing importance to him because it impacted his life and the lives of his families and friends. And so consequently, to want to talk about the big issues of the day and to want to influence them was part and parcel of daily life. Now, while, of course, I'm incredibly grateful to be far removed from the realities of living close to a conflict zone, I do feel like we're going through a period of change in parts of Europe and America that's really worth paying attention to, that's worth taking a step back from what ultimately is the great privilege that many of us have, that we can afford to just focus on ourselves, focus on our families and our careers. But by taking a step back and thinking about the big picture and the kind of world that we want to live in. Now, I see this as a really great opportunity, because where people get engaged who haven't been engaged before, where people start to stand up for things and values that they have taken for granted, and when we start to step out of our individual circles and our individual worlds and start to think about that big picture and the kind of world that we want to live in, we can achieve so much more than we ever could just within our own lives. For this reason, I think and I hope that we are on the brink of a new wave of activism, a wave that will bring new momentum to some old issues. Issues such as the 17 interlinked UN Sustainable Development Goals, which cover everything from climate change and protection of the environment through to new models of sustainable business. Now, each of these issues has its champions, but they each need a big mass of people acting together in order to move forward. And the Sustainable Development Goal that I am particularly passionate about is number 5, global gender equality. Now, when you fundamentally believe, as I do, that women and men are completely, totally equal, it can be really hard to stomach the fact that in 2017, we all still face such an unfinished battle in gender equality. Women are still underrepresented in most major decision-making bodies in the world, still underpaid in most economies, still exploited for sex. 15 million girls are married before the age of 18 every year. That's 1 every 2 seconds. Bringing that closer to home, in England and Wales, approximately 85,000 women are raped every year. Now, the key to coping with this situation, I have found, is by ensuring that progress, little by little, is being made, and by ensuring that I am, in some small way, contributing to that progress. Positive momentum, even if it's slow, it's so important because it gives us hope, and it gives us something to keep us going. Which is why perhaps I had such a visceral reaction to hearing bragging about pussy grabbing being described as just alpha male locker room banter. It made me so determined that now was the time to step up, to make sure that positive momentum on gender equality is maintained, and that sure as heck it isn't going to be moved backwards. Judging by the 5 million people, women and men, all around the world, who joined the women's marches in January earlier this year, I'm not the only one to be feeling this. So the question, I think, is what can we do to maintain this momentum, and what can we do to ensure that this momentum has the most impact? Now, in my career, I have worked with leaders, both as a diplomat and now as a partner in a communications company. I've worked with leaders across business, political, and charity worlds, very often trying to help them to have the maximum impact and influence. And so I've been thinking really hard about this. What is it that I have learned by working with them that I can now apply to myself? And I boiled it down to 3 key points: the power of communication, the power of opportunity, and the power of focus. Now, to start with the power of communication, I would say this, wouldn't I? I work in communications, but I really am passionate about the power of persuasion. Ultimately, the beliefs that we hold in our head, the things that we think are right and wrong, the things that we think are normal, they're all things that we can control and influence. In fact, even the most deep-set beliefs can change 180 degrees over time. Now, it can be quite hard to think about these changes when we're living life day to day, but when we start to think about changes of attitude over whole generations, then the possibilities become far more persuasive. To think about a change that I have seen in my lifetime, I think about drink driving. Now, I am old enough to remember when this really was quite a socially acceptable thing to do. Now, of course, social norms have completely reversed. If I were to try to drive home drunk from a party, chances are my friends would stop me. If I were to offer to drive you home drunk and give you a lift home, chances are you wouldn't get in the car, and nor would you feel bad about that. You wouldn't worry about offending me as we used to do. Our ideas about what's normal and what's okay in this situation have totally changed, and so has our behavior. So to bring this back to gender equality, we have some fantastic campaigns that are doing exactly this, that are changing and challenging our idea about what's okay and what's normal. Campaigns like This Girl Can, Like a Girl, Let Toys Be Toys. And it is really exciting and inspiring to see the impact that these kind of campaigns are starting to have. So if, for example, you do a Google search on the phrase "throws like a girl," and you look at the images page that comes up with, there are still some images out there of where this is being used as an insult to mock someone for throwing weakly, throwing badly. But increasingly, you're seeing images like this. Images that are just awesome, and they make me feel so great to be a girl. Now, in a society that has a strong legal framework, I think it's campaigns like this that are doing so much to move gender equality forward. And the brilliant thing about them is changes in attitudes. That's not something we need permission from. We don't need anyone else to be telling us that we can do this. These are things that each of us can control and can influence. Hence the power of communication. Now, the second way to have big impact, the power of opportunity. I think we are lucky enough to live at a time when we are more empowered to create opportunity than ever before. In fact, I think technology is evolving so quickly that we're perhaps even more empowered to create change for individuals and even whole communities than we even realize, all from the tips of our fingers. Just to give an example using my old world of diplomacy, I thought it was really interesting to see the reaction to the recent reinstatement of the US global gag rule, which potentially threatens to close down a number of family planning and sexual health clinics in some of the poorest countries around the world. Now, rather than a traditional lobbying campaign, She Decides was set up. This was a campaign, a summit, and a crowdfunding platform that to date has raised over $180 million to keep those clinics open. This ability to club together financially, no matter how big or small our contribution, is an absolute game changer. If you add that to the ability of speaking and acting together, that is incredibly powerful. Now, financial technology, fintech, is changing the world of business as well. It's making the process of lending and borrowing money far more transparent and accessible. And it's opening up the world of finance that I think has been an almost stubbornly male domain. So while traditionally the number of companies around the world led by women is far fewer than those led by men, in fact in the UK, it's only 11% of companies are led by women. But if you look at the statistics of crowdfunding platforms like Crowdcube, for example, which is the market leader here in the UK, the percentage of companies receiving money through those platforms which are led by women is double those traditional figures. Now, it's still too low, but it's a rapid jump in the right direction. And for me, I think it's really hopeful. It shows the way that business is changing, and I think in a very positive direction. And of course, this isn't happening only in developed economies. It's happening all around the world. If you want to create an opportunity for an entrepreneur in a different country, you can. It's worth looking at a website called Kiva. Now, this is powered by mobile technology. It's lent almost $950 million to entrepreneurs, predominantly women, from disadvantaged backgrounds all over the world. They have a total repayment rate of 97%. Loans are as small as $25. Just giving someone a chance is often all it takes to make that difference. So the power of focus. Now, I think in this new wave of activism, there are so many things that we can all do. In fact, the problem is perhaps that there are almost too many options. But the single biggest lesson that I have learned from working with leaders in my career is the importance of clarity and focus. Only through focus can you achieve depth, and only then can you hope to shift the dial. Now, this is not to say that we can't all support and get involved in all sorts of different things in a casual way. I mean, you absolutely should. But if you really want to have an impact on an issue, then you have to decide what it is that's most important to you and to hone in. Now, I felt this most keenly when I was British ambassador in Guatemala. As you can imagine, I had a pretty busy day job. But the issue that I really wanted to have an impact on was that of domestic violence and breaking the cycle of violence in the home. Now, this is an issue of relevance all around the world, including here in the UK, where every week approximately 2 women are killed by a partner or ex-partner. Now, what we wanted to do in Guatemala was to bring the conversation out into the open so that domestic violence couldn't hide behind the privacy of the home. We brought together government, charity, business, church, civil society, even the stars of music and sport. And we got people talking about this issue. And it culminated in a human chain of approximately 18,000 people from the top to the bottom of one of Guatemala's incredible volcanoes. Now, only by cooperating and really focusing were we able to achieve this feat. So what does this mean in reality for each and every one of us here today? In short, I think it is really easy to look to others to lead. And there are some brilliant, really inspiring leaders out there. But what I have learned in my time is that not everyone in a position of power is a leader. And we don't always have to look up to find a leader. Nor do we have to wait for someone at the top to take a decision. Very often, leaders are people all around us, people who we can support. And sometimes the buck stops at us. So my question to you today is, what is it that you are passionate about? What kind of world do you want to live in, and what change do you want to see? And using these principles of communication, opportunity, and focus, what is it that you will do to have impact and influence? Now, I know it is really easy to think that there's a better time to get started or someone far better to lead than me. I often feel the same. I am mother to 2 gorgeous young twins. I am very often tired, time poor, pretty strapped. But I have motivation. I do think to myself, what am I going to say to my 2 little girls when they grow up and they ask me about this time in history? Am I going to be able to tell them the things that I did to get out there and stand up for the things I think are important? Or am I going to say that I sat there getting depressed at the news? Now is the time to act. Don't let this wave of activism pass you by. Rather, grab the moment, do something small and see where it takes you. To quote the activist Helen Keller, "Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much." Thank you.